President Trump is set to hold a news conference in minutes. We'll bring you there live when it happens. The president could address the political firestorm he ignited this morning when he asked if the election date should be changed over concerns about mail-in voter fraud. And the president tweeting just a few minutes ago, "Glad I was able to get the very dishonest lamestream media to finally start talking about the risks to our democracy from dangerous universal mail-in voting. Not absentee voting, which I totally support." He added that Americans should know the results of the election the night of, and not days or weeks later. Democrats are furious, calling the president a dictator, saying his comments are meant to be a big distraction. And Barack Obama going after Trump during the funeral for Congressman John Lewis. Take a look.
There are those in power who are doing their darndest to discourage people from voting by closing polling locations and targeting minorities and students with restrictive ID laws and attacking our voting rights with surgical precision, even undermining the Postal Service in the run-up to an election that's going to be dependent on mail-in ballots so people don't get sick.
All right, we'll get to Barack Obama in a minute. I would admit it was a mischievous tweet, Juan, but now that the president has our attention, let's talk about the universal mail-in voting. I found something very interesting here. New Jersey just had a special election last month. It was all mail-in. Everybody did it by mail. And 10% of the ballots were rejected, disqualified for signature issues, or they were late, many, many reasons. So if you have turnout in 2020, 140 million Americans casting their vote, if 10% of those mail-in ballots are disqualified, that's 14 million Americans are disenfranchised. Are you okay with that?
No, I would like to improve it, but that's different than what the president was talking about. He was suggesting there would be fraud, that there would be corruption, that somehow the election might be tilted one way or another by people who were acting in some corrupt manner, Jesse. So I think that, to me, this is very upsetting.
I wouldn't put it past the Democrats to do that. They cheated in the last election.
What? Look, I don't even want to go there. I think President Trump won in 2016. And I think he said, he would have won the popular vote, but there's no evidence. Again, there's no evidence of any fraud related to absentee voting or mail-in voting in this country. But again, you know what's important here, and I hope this might be persuasive to you. If you think about Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, Mitch McConnell, Kevin McCarthy, those people are Republicans. And today they all said this is wrong. There should be no delay in the election of November 2020. That was what they said. I think they were very clear. So I think this is not the action of a party. This is the action of one man who knows he's losing and is willing to trash democracy, trash our Constitution, because he's so upset. I mean, when Joe Biden predicted this in April, Joe Biden said, watch, Trump is going to try to delay the election. What was the response? Biden's spreading conspiracy theories. That's nuts. Trump won't go there. Well, Trump has gone there today, folks. This is wild.
No one really believes he's going to delay the election, Juan. You just fell for it like usual. Greg, how do you read these tweets? And if you want to comment on Barack Obama at the funeral for Lewis, be my guest.
How dare Donald Trump undermine the Postal Service? How dare he undermine the Postal Service, who are billions in debt? What is it? I don't know how much in debt every year. Anyway, you got Trump still is able to work the media 4 years into this with a tweet. It's just too easy. He's like Sherry, and the media is like lamb chop. Do you remember that little ventriloquist with the little lamb chop? Just makes him move it around with the strings. All right, here's the deal. I'm against, in general, this kind of talk about election corruption, which is why what the Democrats did with the fraudulent Steele dossier was so damaging to the country. I mean, they used a fake, paid-for foreign intel to call 2016 into question, and that went on for 3 years, 4 years, probably still going on. And people were outraged when other people said, feels kind of like a coup. Well, maybe it was kind of like a coup when you find out more about the dossier itself. But so you got to blame it on the Dems. You know, the horse left the barn and it was carrying Pandora's box with it. But again, this is what the real problem is. Any close election will be seen as stolen because of this, because of what the Democrats did in 2016. We are now in trouble because of what they did. But you know that if Joe wins, even by a hair or a hair plug, Trump supporters are not going to riot. They're not going to riot because, A, politics to them isn't personal, and they have stuff to do. They're the ones that own the businesses. They're not the ones who are going to throw chairs through the windows of the businesses. But if Trump wins by a hair or more, what you will see, you'll see more Portland, more Seattle, more Manhattan. In fact, that's what the media wants you to think. They want you to think that this will be trouble if Trump wins. They're essentially psychologically extorting you to vote in a different way.
Yeah, they're preparing the groundwork, Kennedy, to question the results of the election. And I think the concern is if you don't know who won the night of the election and you have a bunch of ballots sitting in the back room that have been mailed in, there could be some funny business, as we've seen in other elections. That's the dangerous territory.
Well, you know, Juan was talking about the president already being a sore loser, and we had to listen to Mrs. What happened? And it's going on almost 4 years now. Hillary Clinton cannot let go, and she was the woman who challenged then candidate Trump during one of the debates to accept the outcome of elections. Because, you know, our country is based in a democracy where we accept when we lose, except when she loses, which is phenomenal. Whenever there's a system of voting that only one party is excited about, that always makes me a little nervous. I do like the idea that different counties and states can have their own preferred form of voting. In Oregon, it's all mail-in ballot, and you know the president's right, absentee ballots are very critical, and there are a lot of people who opt into a mail-in ballot system. I don't trust the federal government. If you think the pandemic response has been bad, how do you think they're going to do with a mass mail-in, federally mandated voting system this quickly? It could be a disaster. So let's slow down.
Democrats telling everybody go outside and protest, but don't go outside and vote. I don't know about you, Dana. I like the idea you go into the voting booth. You're the only one there with your ballot. You vote for whoever you want, and then it gets counted there at the polling station and reported that night. When you get everybody else involved, I don't have a good feeling about that. You could address that, or you could address Barack Obama politicizing, as many people are saying, the funeral of John Lewis.
Well, on the voting thing, I think it's important to say, like, yes, that's ideal. Like, being able to go to the voting booth, that is ideal. But that is actually just, I think that one of the things that would be important for everyone, including the president, is to deal in reality. The reality is that there are going to be many states that offer up mail-in voting. He says, like, he's trying to make a distinction about absentee voting versus mail-in voting. And it is a distinction with a difference. But what's happening is many states, including Florida, the Republican Party of Florida, is so worried that their mail-in voting, their absentee voting, is so low compared to the Democrats already that they doctored one of the president's tweets from a while ago to make it look like it would be a good thing to do mail-in voting, because the president's very persuasive to his supporters who were being asked about mail-in voting, like, no thanks, no, I don't do mail-in voting because it's fraudulent. And so he's trying to make that distinction. I'm trying to think that, except for maybe the 4th of July, did the president actually just nail any of the news cycles any day in the month of July? And I think July 4th might have been a highlight. I think some people thought that was a low light. I'd say it was a highlight, you know, with his speech at Mount Rushmore and the pageantry there. But the number one thing on people's minds right now is the coronavirus. They're worried about their schools, they're worried about their health, and they're worried about the economy. And this issue of the mail-in voting, it is way down on their list. And he's not talking about any of those other things today. Maybe he will today at the press conference. On President Obama, whether that was politicizing, yeah. But here's the thing. You saw the reaction. The family and friends and the loved ones believe that what John Lewis would have wanted is for activism to continue. And I think that President Obama was answering the mail by doing that at that memorial service today.
Yeah, the audience did eat that up.